I'm going to talk about what happens to decimal numbers when you multiply them by 10, 100, or 1,000, or other multiples of 10. Here's an example up here. Of course, we have $17.04. Of course, 1 times that equals itself. And if we multiply it by 10, what we could do is just do all the multiplication, or we could add this 10 times. There's actually a trick you can use. If you're multiplying something by 10, and this only works for multiples of 10, all you have to do is move the decimal point over a number of places that is equal to the number of zeros that you see. So there's 1 0 here, so I move this over to the right once, and I get $170.40. Now if I take $17.04 and I multiply it by 100. Notice that there are 2 zeros here, so I move it over 2 places, 1, 2, and I get $1,704. So in this problem, I have 3 zeros. I'm multiplying by 1,000, and that has 3 zeros in it, so I move the decimal 3 places, 1, 2, 3. Notice that there's a space here. If you go beyond the end of your number, you just fill that with a 0. So I get $17,040 if I take $17.04 and I multiply it by 1,000. Now here's another example. Here's a different example. Now we're going to multiply by tenths, not tens. Now, you can think of this as, well, of course, 1 times 6,391 is 6,391. And if I'm multiplying by 0.1, I'm multiplying by 1/10. I'm finding 1/10 of this. Now, if you find a tenth of something, it's going to get smaller. Imagine you have $10. 1/10 of that is $1. It gets smaller. Now, if I moved my decimal to the right, this number would get bigger, as we saw here. It got way bigger. It went from 17 something to 17,000 something. But since we're multiplying by tenths, by fractions of 1, or I should say decimal numbers that are less than 1, this number is going to get smaller. So instead of moving to the right, we move to the left, and the number gets smaller. So now a whole number, you could put, if you have a whole number, it has no decimal point, you could put a decimal point at the end. There's an implied decimal point. Okay? Now this has 1 digit after the decimal point. That means I move my decimal 1 place, but I move it to the left. So I have 639.1. This got smaller. This was 6,000 something, now it's 600 something. Okay, so now I have 1/100th. Now, if you had $100, 1/100th of that would be $1. So it's going to get way smaller. Once again, my decimal's at the end. There are 2 digits after the decimal. Then I move my decimal 2 places to the left, and I get 63.91. So I went from 6,000 something to 63, around 63 or so. So 1/100th is much smaller, and it does make it much smaller. So on your homework, you're going to see problems like this that have letters. Don't freak out because of the letters. That just means the same thing as a blank. This says n times $3.25 equals $325. You can think of it as blank times $3.25 equals $325. Okay? So if that's easier for you right now, you can just put a blank there. So something times this equals this. So let's see what we did here. What happened to this to get to this? Well, it looks like we moved the decimal place 2 places to the right to get this. So, and it got bigger. So we know it got bigger, so it's not going to be a tenth or 100th or anything like that. It's going to be 10 or 100 or 1,000 or something like that. Now, we moved 2 places over, and so that means there's 2 zeros after my 1. So that's going to be 100. So n in this case is 100. I just replace n with 100, and this equation will be complete. Okay, so now we have a tenth here. 1/10 times n, or blank if that's easier for you, 1.1 times n equals 89.5. Now I know that if I multiply something by 0.1, it's going to get smaller. I'm going to move my decimal over to the left. So this must be bigger because I did something to it to make it smaller. So if it's bigger and there's only one digit after the decimal, then this must be this, 895. Now let me test it. I'm going to multiply this by 0.1. It gets smaller by one place value, or by 1/10, and I get 89.5 as my answer if I do that. So this checks out, and in this case, n equals 895. And finally, we have 1,000 times n equals 630. So I know if I multiply something by 1,000, I move the decimal point over this way 3 places, because there's 3 zeros, okay? So this had to be smaller than this one, because if I multiply something by 1,000, it gets bigger. So if this is where my decimal point is now, this must be where it used to be, right in front of the 6. So let me try that. 0.630. If I multiply this by 1,000, 1, 2, 3, it goes to the end here, and I get 630. That checks out. So n in this case is 630.